Alison Onzikuka, Krista McAuliffe, Gregory Jarvis died performing their duty. They died not as individuals of a crew, but working as a team, united in devotion and a commitment to the United States, their country. This afternoon, we are united in the same spirit as the crew. Oh, our deep feeling for them. We pray for these brave Americans, for their families, and for our countries. And so we're delighted that the resolution comes before us as the product of the majority leader of the House and the minority leader of the House. And it allows us to express our sentiments in this day of sorrow.
The gentleman from California.
The Speaker of the House, Congressman Tip O'Neill, commenting on the resolution which was passed in the House of Representatives earlier today, resolving that the House should express its condolences to the families of the crew members on board Challenger, and resolve, which I misled you slightly, adjourn for the day as a mark of respect. I should have had the sense to tell you that everybody would want to talk to that resolution before the House finally did adjourn, but it will adjourn. And the President's State of the Union message, which he was going to give at 9 o'clock Eastern time this evening to a joint session of the House and the Senate, will now not be held for at least a week. Talk about contrasts, I suppose, in a way. At a time of a mission, NASA bombards us with information. All of the telemetry, virtually every move, and you've seen us cover it for years now. Every time we have an opportunity for a television picture from the Cape or from Houston or from space. For the last almost 4 hours now, this is all that we have seen from Cape Canaveral. Just one photograph on what they call their video release system, telling us that there will be a news conference this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at which time we hope, but we should not be wishfully hopeful, I think, at this point, to give us some more information on what happened today. Vice President Bush, as you know, has been sent by President Reagan, I'm sure without any effort whatsoever, to go to Cape Canaveral, where he is going to talk to and console on behalf of the President, and therefore on behalf of the official family of the first family of the nation, accompanied by John Glenn, who you just saw, and Senator Jake Garn from Utah, who just walked across in front of your picture. And though I don't recognize him by sight, that may be Congressman Bill Nelson from Florida as well. We're going to go with the Vice President to console the family members in Florida. Sam Donaldson is standing by at the White House. Sam, does the Vice President have any other particular brief with him?
Well, the Vice President, of course, is going to head the first look from the White House's standpoint at what went wrong today. He's not leading an investigation, as we heard Larry Speake say, but he is going to take a look at the first amount of information that NASA has and report back to the President.
Sam, the President has put off his State of the Union, as we've said a number of times now. Do you know when it's going to happen, A? And B, is he going to talk to the nation tonight?
Well, it's going to happen a week from today. That's what Press Secretary Speake said. He is going to speak from the Oval Office for about 5 minutes, sometime a little later today, but it's not scheduled as a prime-time speech, Peter. As soon as NASA holds its news conference, about 3:30 Eastern Time, the White House is going to gear up, and perhaps in the next hour or two after that, the President will deliver a very short 5-minute speech.
But the Vice President, Sam, is clearly going to the Cape as a mark of respect rather than as a member of an investigating team, right?
Well, that's his first thing. Maybe I misunderstood you when you said, does he have any other brief or a brief? I thought perhaps you meant, does he have any other duties when he went down there?
No, if you misunderstood me, it's probably at this point, Sam, because I misspoke. Any changes at the White House now in the last few hours?
No, I think now everything is in a routine after they've made this decision to cancel the State of the Union. As you know, first, Peter, the President was inclined to go ahead. In fact, in talking to reporters, I said to him, but it will cast a pall over your speech tonight, which is going to be an upbeat speech if you deliver it. He said, yes, that's true, but you can't stop governing the nation. But after he went back into the Oval Office, I'm told that almost everyone, including the President, thought about it a little bit and unanimously decided they couldn't go ahead with this speech. that to do so would be misunderstood completely and would be totally out of place.
Sam, does the president have any passionate personal interest in space, such as, for example, John Kennedy had?
No, there's no evidence that Mr. Reagan has any interest such as that in space. He's followed it as most laymen have, and of course as president he's had to pass on appropriations and things like that, but he doesn't refer to it often. He has not pushed it in speeches throughout the years. It is clearly not one of his top priorities.
I heard one reporter at a White House briefing we heard earlier with our speaks asking whether or not this was going to have any effect on the Strategic Defense Initiative or Star Wars program. I assume that was just a question, was it?
Well, I assume it was, because in fact, whenever he delivers his State of the Union message a week from today, as I say, he has a line in there, once again, saying that we must have the Strategic Defense Initiative, and that he intends just on the other side of the White House mansion, as you know, from the President's offices in the West Wing. And she knew about this immediately, and it was flashed on television, and we are told by our press secretary that she said, "Oh, God," and they called over immediately from the West Wing to see if she was watching, and she was in fact watching. Beyond that, I have no reaction from her.
Sam, thank you very much for joining us. I confess we're not going to let you get too far away today, but we are going to tell you that the news conference, which NASA had told us it was going to have at 3:30, is now going to be delayed until 4 o'clock, and that is the Vice President's plane leaving Andrews Air Force Base to go to Florida. The Vice President, the man in the political hierarchy in this country who is always sent on such missions. Never have asked him individually how he feels to spend as much time as he does in various parts of the world expressing the condolences and carrying with him the official public sadness of the American people as well as the administration, but he does a great deal of it. And though this is clearly not an occasion for it, when he was shuttling back and forth to the Soviet Union with the death of successive Soviet leaders, it even became a subject of some jokes. But he does not go on a mission today, clearly, that is any joking matter.
Running normally, 3 good fuel cells.
You're watching a videotape of what happened shortly after 11:30 this morning Eastern Time.
257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Roger, go with throttle up. One minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
This is what television viewers have come to recognize now as super slow-mo or super slow motion. And there you see the flare, at least at that speed that we referred to earlier, the beginning of the explosion, which appears to be occurring somewhere in the area between the main tank and the outboard solid fuel tanks. And as Gene Cernan, former astronaut Gene Cernan has said to us, occurred within, he thought, microseconds, engulfing the actual space shuttle itself. That parachute, which gave us such hope earlier this morning, has subsequently been described to us as some member of a rescue operation or presumed rescue operation going into the Atlantic off the Cape. It was the site of that parachute some hours ago, 5 hours ago, 4 hours ago,
Coordinating with recovery forces
in which
field.
the nation hung for a considerable length of time before the realization really began to sink the celebratory atmosphere before the launch occurred this morning. You will recall that they'd all hoped it was going to go off yesterday and had been quite disappointed and in some instances quite indignant that it hadn't gone off, but there was a problem with a hatch door yesterday. And then this morning the weather was good, even though there'd been some icing overnight, and the weather had been good both at the pad and 20,000 feet where they'd had some very severe wind yesterday, and they settled in this morning to watch their teacher go into space.
Looking at all the contingency operations and awaiting word from any recovery forces in the downrange field.
And the transformation in Concord from joy and pride to shock and to sadness, reflected all over the nation today. We're joined now by the Reverend Jesse Jackson. We are joined on tape by the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who knew one of the astronauts on board and, like so many people this morning who had some connection with the space community, simply wanted to say something about it.
4%. Normal throttles for most of the flight, 104%. We'll throttle down to 65% shortly. Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles, downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up. 1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
The fireball had happened. Debris begins to fall after the explosion. This part of the space shuttle overall vehicle, as it trailed smoke coming down into the ocean a short ways east of the launch site. You heard Commander Francis Scobie was told by Mission Control in Houston to throttle up.
Very carefully at the situation.
Then he said, oh, Roger, he was throttling up.
Major malfunction.
Mission Control in Houston, stunned, doesn't know what has happened, says,
No downlink.
obviously, there's been a malfunction, as they called it. No downlink, no communication. By this time, horror was setting in at Mission Control in Houston and everywhere as debris began to rain down into the sea. Now,
and its many spectacular successes have left us full of admiration. It is tragic that this success has taken its price in brave young lives. Our sympathy goes especially to their families, but also to you and to all Americans. Elizabeth R., which of course is Queen Elizabeth II. Further reaction from the Republic of Ireland, where the Prime Minister Garret Fitzgerald has expressed his sympathy and shock, and has added that we are all deeply appalled by the accident, but equally we are convinced it will not discourage America with pushing forward with the space program. A note of perhaps irony, but perhaps worth mentioning as a connection to London, and I think people over here will use this to further their feeling of closeness to the American people tonight. Miss McAuliffe's life was insured for $1 million through Lloyd's of London. That insurance policy, we are given to understand, was donated from an American company and arranged here, Lloyd's of London. It's certainly of little consequence to her family, but something that the people over here will, of course, take note of.
Mike, thank you very much, and reaction comes clearly also from north of the border. The Canadians have long had an interest in the American space program. A Canadian astronaut has already flown on board the shuttle. He's a Canadian naval officer. I've forgotten his name, I'm sorry to say. But he's become something of a national hero in Canada as well as he travels back and forth across the nation, getting the same kind of treatment from young school children in Canada that astronauts get in this country. And of course, Canada has the great arm on board the shuttle, which has been so useful, that Lynn Sure described to us so accurately before. The Canadian Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, when he heard the news this morning, called up the American ambassador right away, and then there was a minute of silence in the Canadian House of Commons in Ottawa. Again, all of this, we tell you, not only to report the news that is going on, but simply to illustrate, again, just how extensively the impact of this tragedy has been felt on a global basis. Out of the corner of my eye here, and I'll show it to you again, we have been watching the single message we have had from Mission Control. If we could look at it, please, from the Kennedy Space Center. It's called their video release system, and their news conference clock.
Here in West Germany, passengers at the busy Frankfurt airport huddled around TV sets and expressed the same shock being felt throughout the United States.
Terrible.
What do you think it'll do for America's space program?
Oh, I personally don't think that it will change very much.
It's very, very horrible, but I think they must do it again.
The Germans feel a special understanding of this loss because late last year they were part of another shuttle launch in a joint venture with the United States. Chancellor Helmut Kohl and Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres were holding a news conference in Bonn when they were informed of the incident. Armed Services Television broke in with live reports from the United States so that the 200,000 soldiers stationed here can follow the story. And throughout Europe, millions are following the special reports on radio and television and making known their sorrow. Mike Von Fremd, ABC News, Frankfurt.
There was a day when all that would seem very far away, but in part because of the satellites which NASA lifts into space, we're all interconnected now. You can sit, as I have done, in places like West Germany and in Korea, and watch the evening newscasts, among other things, from America, virtually.
Especially here this afternoon. At 11:40 a.m. this morning, space program experienced a national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center. I regret that I have to report that based on very preliminary searches of the ocean where the Challenger impacted this morning, these searches have not revealed any evidence that the crew of Challenger survived. The dedicated crew members of Challenger are Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael J. Smith, mission specialist Dr. Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Dr. Ronald McNair. And payload specialists on board were Krista McAuliffe and Greg Jarvis. All early indications in the Launch Control Center, the Kennedy Space Center, have indicated that the launch was normal up to approximately 11:40 a.m. this morning, about a minute or so into the flight. Flight controllers in the Launch Control Center here and in the Mission Control Center in Houston were polled immediately after the explosion, reported that they did not see anything unusual up to that point. The solid rocket booster recovery ships were immediately dispatched to the area approximately 18 or so miles downrange from Kennedy, along with various Coast Guard and military ships, helicopters, and planes. I have taken an immediate action to form an interim investigating board to implement early activities in this tragedy. Data from all of the shuttle instrumentation, photographs, launch pad systems, hardware, cargo, ground support systems, and even notes made by any member of the launch team and flight ops team are being impounded for study. A formal board will be established by the acting administrator very, very shortly. Subsequent reports on this tragedy will be made by this formal review board. I am aware and have seen the media is showing footage of the launch today from the NASA Select system. We will not speculate as to the specific cause of the explosion based on that footage. It will take all the data, careful review of that data, before we can draw any conclusions on this national tragedy. Thank you.
Mr. Moore has time for just a couple of questions from each center before returning to the effort in investigating this tragedy. Please wait for the microphone and give your name and your affiliation. And we'll start right here with Jacqueline Bolden from Channel 6.
there were some reports that the shuttle perhaps rose a little slower than in previous launches, and there seemed to be a loud noise, and then the noise kind of backed off, and then a rush of noise again. Did you get any reports from anyone else that this seemed different from the people who either experienced it, saw it here live?
I have not heard any reports at all relative to that effect that you just described. None whatsoever.
Okay. Up here in the third row, Michael.
My name's Kevin Hamilton from WGIR in Manchester. The entire Teacher in Space program was designed to introduce more people, specifically youngsters, to the space program. This obviously is not the introduction you intended to make. What do you think the effect, the long-term impact that this is going to have on the youngsters that you were hoping to attract?
Well, I think we'll have to address that as time goes on. And again, I think today, the events of the day makes it much too early for me to speculate on the long-term impacts.
Okay, Al Selstead from Baltimore Sun in the first row.
Mr. Moore, at this time, do you have any estimate of how much liquid fuel was in the external tank at the time of the explosion, and how much explosive power, say in terms of TNT, that remaining liquid fuel might have been equal to?
No, sir, not at this time. You realize what we've been doing since 11:40 this morning is we immediately pulled our senior management together in this program, and I formed an interim board to ensure that all relevant data to this event would be impounded and would be made accessible to the investigative people that will go and take a look at it. I can't answer your specific questions relative to how much fuel was on board at this point in time. The board, when it's formally reported by the administrator, formally formed by the acting administrator, I'm sure will go into those kinds of questions, but I can't answer it right now.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here before going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Here in the right opposite you, Jackie.
Peter Van Sant from CBS News. We received a call today from a member of an academic group who said he was on a tour group that was at the Pad 39B on Saturday night. This group was supposed to get off the bus to take a close look at the shuttle, but was not allowed to because this caller says they were told that a derrick arm had struck one of the tanks on the shuttle and that some repair work was being done. Are you aware of this incident, and are you aware of any problems at all with any of with either the external tank or the two solid rocket boosters?
No, we looked at that on Saturday. There was not even in the same area that of the tank. It was a small box, heater box, that had about a quarter of an inch of the insulation out of 5 inches that was scraped. It was a very minor scrape. It was repaired, and everybody, all the experts in the program, took a look at that, and so we closed it off at that point in time.
Wait for the microphone. I have to have the microphone.
There was no damage to any tank, or this arm did not strike any tank as far as
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, we're going to the Johnson Space Center for questions. Just a couple of questions.
This is the Johnson Space Center. We have a question from Paul Reeser, Associated Press.
Yes, Mr. Moore. Was there any debris of any description recovered by the vessels, and if so, what was it?
We do not have any detailed debris reports at this point in time. That certainly is something that we're looking at, and we will be impounding all the debris that we recover, and we've set up plans here to store that debris so that the investigating group can go in and look at that and assess that in great detail. I do not have any detailed reports right now on debris.
Okay. Bruce Nichols.
Mr. Moore, with all the delays that you experienced last week, the delay again this week, was there any pressure building at all to try to get this one off the ground? Was the pressure up there? And who made the final decision to go or no go?
There was absolutely no pressure to get this particular launch off. We have always maintained that flight safety is our top priority consideration in the program, and we look at the status and readiness of the systems based on that. We thoroughly reviewed the activities over the weekend and yesterday, and continually reviewed the status of Challenger right up until launch this morning. All of the people involved in this program, to my knowledge, felt that Challenger was quite ready to go, and I made the decision, along with the recommendation from the team supporting me, that we launch.
We're going to the Marshall Space Flight Center for a couple of questions.
Martin Berkey with Huntsville Times. Can you tell me what this does to the schedule on down the line, including the launch at Vandenberg?
No, I'm not prepared to do that. What I have done is basically suspend operations for a few days till we can sit down and assess this. And, you know, we're obviously not going to pick up any flight activity until we fully understand what the circumstances were relative to this morning's launch. So in the interim, near-term time, we basically suspended operations until we get a handle on what our problems were this morning.
Nick Miller, WAFF Television in Huntsville. What part will Marshall Space Flight Center play in the investigation, since the propulsion system was the responsibility of the Space Flight Center here?
Well, they obviously have to play a very strong role in the investigating what happened this morning. As you know, the Space Shuttle program is built around a team effort, not only involving the Marshall Center, but also the Kennedy Space Center and the Johnson Space Center. All of the elements have different responsibilities, and clearly Marshall has the propulsive responsibilities on the shuttle. They will play a very dominant role, as will the other three centers I mentioned, as well as anybody that is contributing to the overall program and has some relevant information to add will certainly play a part.
Okay, we're moving to Washington for questions from NASA headquarters. Okay, there is a problem with our audio circuits to Washington. We are going to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena.
Bill Hines of the Chicago Sun-Times. Mr. Moore, in your opening remarks, you mentioned the appointment of this interim review board and said that it would be making statements from time to time. Not to put any adverse interpretations on this, it sounds a little bit like a news blackout, and I'm wondering if your objective is to consolidate information, what will be the point of issue of all those announcements in the future? And are other people not involved in that review board forbidden to talk?
Well, let me correct your statement. First of all, I said that I had appointed an interim review board. That interim review board is composed of the senior members of the NASA team here to take immediate actions on impounding data. The acting administrator is expected to appoint a formal review board very shortly, and it will be left up to that review board in order to determine its progress reports in terms of their findings. What we have done here today is to move very quickly so that all relevant data could be impounded and all actions that are needed to be taken in order to preserve as much information as we can on the circumstances of this morning can be preserved. And that's the nature of the work that I've implemented today, and I expect a formal board to be established very, very shortly, within the next day or so, by the acting administrator.
This is Roy Neal, NBC News. Jeff, you've said, I believe, that future flights are temporarily frozen. The United States space program, as a result, is at a halt. Now, based on your experience, how long would you estimate that this investigation will take? 6 months, a year, before you get back in business?
Roy, it is, as you know, it is very difficult to estimate that time. It's going to be a function of what the board finds were the difficulties today and what corrective actions have to be taken before we feel confident and feel safe to fly again. And I clearly am not in a position to speculate today the length of time involved in making that determination. It will be done just as quickly as we possibly can, but also as prudently as we possibly can and as thoroughly as we possibly can.
One more question from JPL.
Bill Hines again. I've got to follow up on that first question of mine. I understand now that there will be announcements made after the permanent board is appointed. Is that correct?
There will be an announcement, I'm sure, of the members of the permanent board, yes. I believe that will be correct, and then I think that board will determine its rate of reporting based on the progress of its findings.
Okay, we're going next to the Washington NASA headquarters.
Are there any indications of sabotage or attack on the shuttle?
I can't hear. I'm sorry, we didn't read that question. And while they're repairing that circuit to Washington, we'll go to the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland.
Mark Weaver, WBAL Radio in Baltimore. Has this raised any questions about how reliable the space shuttle is? Might there just be too many things that could go wrong with a vessel this complicated?
Well, that question, I'm sure, will be asked, and I don't want to speculate on that at this point in time. That's certainly a logical question for somebody to ask.
Ken Carroll from WDVM in Washington. Were there any unusual weather conditions aloft or any unusual weather conditions during the launch?
None that we observed that I recall. We did put up some weather balloons early this morning. We did look at load conditions as we normally do, and the winds aloft looked good. We didn't have any exceedances as far as our load indicators are concerned, to my knowledge, and we thought everything was in good shape for a launch this morning.
Mr. Moore, I.J. Hudson from WRC-TV. Has it become a problem that you have been too good in the past, that the American people have seen flawlessly perform missions on TV almost routinely, and that something like this happens all of a sudden, it hits home even harder?
Well, I don't know how to answer your question specifically. We always strive in every flight that we perform to be as reliable and as safe as we possibly can, and to do everything that we can to ensure that the vehicle and the systems are all ready to fly. Flight safety is our number one priority in the space shuttle program. And certainly when you see an event like this morning, we are going to have to do a very detailed assessment of the set of circumstances to try to understand what occurred, and we will then in turn assess the impacts from that to determine where we go in the future.
I think you can hear it over there.
Okay, back here at the Kennedy Space Center, we only have time for a couple more questions. Jay Barbary from NBC News in the front row here.
Jess, I would like to know if you know what happened to Challenger. Can we assume that it was consumed in the explosion? And can you tell us specifically what you know now that the recovery crew has recovered in the impact area?
I have not gotten a briefing, Jay, on what the recovery team has found at this point in time. And I have basically looked at the NASA select photos and so forth that you did, and all I can say is that it appeared from those photos that there was an explosion. And that's about all I can say at this point in time.
Okay, we have time for only one more question, and James Fisher from the Orlando Sentinel has had his hand up a long time.
Jess, I realize this is a rather forward-thinking question, but what is the situation with the Rockwell plant about the possibility for ordering another shuttle? Has the assembly line been shut down? What's the situation with that?
Well, as we've discussed in the past, we are manufacturing structural spares for an orbiter system, and that manufacturing process is continuing. We are also buying spares for the current fleet that we have, and there is a production capability there if and when it's decided that that's the next step we want to do, is to move forward and do that. So I think the bottom line answer to your question is yes, that is a possibility, that we could implement a production capability for another orbiter if that were decided to be the thing to do.
Okay, I'm sorry to have to wind this up now. Mr. Moore has to get back immediately. As you know, he's been here since very early in the morning, and there's much to be done. Thank you all.
Thank you.
That's the news conference from the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida, where we heard Jess Moore with the first definitive, although not wide-ranging, reaction of NASA to what happened today at about 1 minute and 30 seconds, as he indicated, after liftoff of the Space Shuttle Challenger. It blew up. He would not speculate at all on what may have happened. He would not even say whether he believed that the shuttle itself, that is the aircraft, the space aircraft, was consumed in the explosion or whether it went down intact. And then we believe if it did that, in fact, it would have broken up when it hit the water. He would not even comment on that. He did say that all tapes, all notes, all reactions now have been impounded. There will be a full investigation. And he says, I regret, I have to report that there is no evidence that any member of the crew survived this explosion. And as we have been looking at this gigantic fireball all day long, there is no indication that anyone could have survived that no ejection system could have permitted any kind of an escape to safety on the part of the 7 people on board, including Krista McAuliffe. As you can see,
5%, 3 engines running normally.
we're approaching the critical stage.
Fred? Fred? I must have monitors up here.
As I say, we have shown that to you repeatedly again and again and again today. It is not that we have a ghoulish curiosity. We just think that it's important that all members of the audience who are coming to their sets at different times of the day have an opportunity to see it. And of course, everyone is led to their own speculation based on what happened here today as well. We are now awaiting the arrival of President Reagan in the Oval Office, where he will directly address the nation on this tragedy. All schedules have been scrambled here in Washington, as I'm sure that they have been across the country today, as we try to deal with the enormity of this tragedy. What we have here is the President speaking to the nation today about this national tragedy, as it was described by Jess Moore, instead of addressing the country tonight on what he had hoped would be a message of hope and peace and a forward-looking future for America, talking about family values and the hope of the economy. That was the State of the Union address, which has now been, of course, postponed until next Tuesday, and the President will talk to us from the Oval Office. Chris Wallace will be standing by thereafter to talk about the investigation machinery that has already been put in place. The White House on a stark and somber day. The President was informed as he prepared for his State of the Union address tonight. It was his idea, as I indicated earlier, to put a teacher in space, and he felt, as he indicated to reporters when he met with them earlier at the Roosevelt Room, a great personal loss and sympathy, thinking especially of the husband and the children of Krista McAuliffe, who was lost today in that explosion. And now here is the President of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. And perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. We mourn 7 heroes: Michael Smith, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe. We mourn their loss as a nation together. To the families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We've grown used to wonders in this century. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission and tell them your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. There's a coincidence today. On this day 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans, and a historian later said he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Thank you.
President Reagan with a moving statement, a personal statement really, from the White House, from the Oval Office today, explaining that he had hoped tonight to address the State of the Union in a joint session of Congress, but instead he was forced to share with the American public this national tragedy. He talked about these brave people who have slipped the surly bonds of earth and touched the face of God. And he addressed as well, quite directly it seemed to me, the school children of the country, many of whom were watching today because, after all, this was part of the effort to put a school teacher in space, was to